Emma stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection she barely recognized anymore. The woman looking back at her had tired eyes, faint lines from years of holding in emotions, and a smile that rarely reached her eyes. Her husband Mark was downstairs, probably watching the same late-night news show he always did. They had been married for 14 years and somewhere between paying bills, raising kids, and surviving life. Love had turned into a quiet routine. They weren't unhappy, but they weren't happy either. It was as if they were living side by side, not together, like two strangers who happened to share the same roof. Emma often wondered when the laughter stopped. She remembered the early days, the long drives, the coffee dates, the way Mark used to surprise her with flowers for no reason. But those things had faded over time. Now they spoke mostly about grocery lists, car repairs, and schedules. Every day felt predictable, safe, and painfully empty. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Emma found herself scrolling through old photos. She saw her younger self laughing beside Mark on a beach, her hair messy from the wind, his arm around her shoulders. They looked free, alive. That night, she quietly cried, not from sadness alone, but from the realization that she missed that version of herself more than anything. Mark wasn't a bad man. He was kind, hardworking, and loyal. But he had grown distant. Work had consumed him. When he came home, he was exhausted mentally and physically. He rarely noticed Emma's attempts to reconnect. A new dress, a cooked meal, a small note in his lunch, they went unnoticed, like whispers in a storm. Emma began feeling invisible. One Friday evening, Mark came home late again. He dropped his briefcase by the door and mumbled something about traffic. Emma had cooked his favorite meal, hoping they could talk, but he barely touched his food. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, replying to emails. "Mark, can we talk for a second?" She asked softly. "Yeah, sure," he said, not looking up. I feel like we've become different people lately. Like you're here, but not really here." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emma, I'm tired." "Okay. Work's been crazy. Can we talk about this later?" "Later," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She smiled sadly and cleared the dishes. That night, lying beside him, Emma stared at the ceiling. She felt the space between them, physical and emotional, like a wall she couldn't climb anymore. Mark turned away, already asleep, while she lay awake wondering if love could fade this quietly. A week later, her best friend Claire convinced her to join a small community event in town, a charity art show. Emma hesitated but finally agreed. "It might be good for you to get out," Claire said. "You've been cooped up too long." At the event, surrounded by paintings and soft music, Emma felt something she hadn't in years: light. People laughed, talked freely, and admired art that spoke of love, freedom, and passion. As she wandered the room, her eyes landed on a painting of a broken cup being pieced back together with gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi. The artist's note read, "Even what breaks can become beautiful again." The words hit her deeply. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice beside her said. She turned to see a man tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I painted that one," he added. His name was David, a local artist and widower. They talked for a few minutes, mostly about the painting and its meaning. Emma didn't think much of it, just a kind exchange between strangers. But his words lingered with her long after she left the event. That night she thought about the broken cup and the idea that maybe, just maybe, her life could be pieced back together too. Over the next few weeks, Emma started visiting the community center more often. She joined a small art class there, something she used to love but had long given up. David often helped the group, giving advice and encouragement. He was gentle, respectful, and spoke with the kind of attention Emma hadn't felt in years. One day, as she worked on a painting, he said, "You have a good eye for emotion. You paint how you feel." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but some emotions are too heavy to paint." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then maybe those are the ones that most need to be." His words struck something in her heart. She didn't understand why his presence felt comforting. Maybe because he listened. Really listened without trying to fix her. Meanwhile, things at home remained the same. Mark was still buried in work. Dinners were quiet, conversations brief. Emma's laughter at the art center slowly returned, but at home she went silent again. She wasn't trying to replace her marriage. She just wanted to feel alive, to remember what it was like to be seen. One night, as she prepared for bed, Mark came in, phone in hand, talking about a project deadline. She waited for him to finish before softly saying, "Mark, when was the last time we did something together, just us?" He frowned, confused. "We see each other every day." "That's not the same," she replied gently. "You don't really see me anymore." Mark didn't know what to say. He stood there for a moment, then shrugged. "Emma, I'm doing my best. You know that?" "I know," she said, turning away before he could see the tears in her eyes. The next day, at the art center, David noticed she was quieter than usual. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just tired." He smiled kindly. Sometimes being tired isn't just about sleep. Emma looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she felt the ache of being understood. It scared her. She knew she shouldn't feel anything more than friendship. Yet a part of her longed for the warmth that Mark once gave her so freely. When she got home that evening, Mark was asleep on the couch, TV still on. She turned it off and watched him for a moment. The man she had loved for so many years. The father of her children, the person she had built a life with. She felt sadness, guilt, and confusion all tangled together. She whispered softly, "I just wish you'd look at me the way you used to." Days passed, and the emotional gap grew. Emma didn't realize she was standing at a crossroads between duty and desire, between what was right and what her heart ached for it at the art center one evening. A sudden power outage left everyone in dim emergency light. David offered to walk her to her car. The night was cool, the air smelled of rain. As they reached her car, he said quietly, "You seem sad lately?" Emma managed a small smile. "It's complicated. Most real things are," he replied softly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. Then she stepped back, realizing what she was risking. "Thank you for walking me," she said. Forcing a smile, he nodded, understanding the boundary she drew, even if her eyes said otherwise. That night, Emma lay awake again, torn between guilt and longing. She wasn't angry at Mark. She was just lonely. Deeply lonely. She missed laughter, connection, touch, not in a physical sense, but in the way two souls once met without barriers. She realized she was searching for something that had been lost long before. She met David, something that started slipping away the moment she and Mark stopped trying to understand each other. As the clock ticked past midnight, Emma whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" It wasn't a confession. It was a plea to her heart, to her life, to the part of her that still hoped love could be repaired. And as rain began to fall softly outside, she made a silent promise to find herself again before she lost everything else. Days turned into weeks, and Emma felt herself caught between two worlds, the quiet stillness of her home and the gentle warmth of the art center. Her mornings began the same way, preparing breakfast, watching Mark rush through his routine and pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, something was changing. She was no longer numb. She was restless. She wanted to feel connected again to life, to herself, to love. Mark had started traveling more for work. Every time he packed his bag, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It gave her time to think, to breathe. But it also left her alone in a house that no longer felt like home. The walls echoed with memories, laughter, shared meals, the sound of children once running through the halls. Now, it was just silence. One evening, Claire invited her for coffee. "You've been so distant lately," her friend said. "What's going on?" Emma hesitated. She didn't want to sound ungrateful. Mark provided for her. He cared in his own quiet way. But something inside her was fading. "I just feel invisible," Emma said softly. "Like I'm here, but I'm not really seen anymore." Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "Marriage isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just Surviving together, Emma nodded, but her heart didn't agree. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to feel alive again. At the art center, things felt different. David noticed her mood immediately. "You seem distracted," he said, one afternoon as they cleaned up brushes. She smiled faintly. "Just life." He chuckled. "Life tends to do that. Pulls us in all directions." Their conversations were never deep on purpose, but they always found meaning between the lines. David talked about his late wife, how losing her had taught him to appreciate the small things. Emma listened quietly, realizing how much she missed being heard like this. One day, David showed her a new painting, two hands almost touching, with light breaking through the space between them. "It's about connection," he explained. "Sometimes we're close to something, but not quite there." Emma stared at the painting longer than she should have. It mirrored exactly how she felt. "You understand that feeling, don't you?" he asked softly. She met his eyes, her heart tightening. "More than I'd like to admit." Later that week, Mark called from his business trip. His voice was rushed, tired. "I'll be home Sunday night," he said. Emma wanted to tell him she missed him, but when she tried, the words wouldn't come. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was emptiness, like speaking to someone through a wall. That Sunday, he returned late. She waited with dinner, but he barely noticed. "I already ate," he said, heading to his office to finish a report. As she cleared the untouched food, Emma felt her chest tighten. It wasn't about the meal. It was about the effort, the simple gestures that used to mean something. When she walked past his office, she paused by the door. He looked up briefly. "Everything okay?" She forced a smile. "Yeah, everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. A few days later, the Art Center announced a weekend retreat for local artists, a small event by the lakeside. David encouraged Emma to come. "It's peaceful there," he said. "Might help you clear your mind." She hesitated. "I'm not sure Mark would understand." "Sometimes," David said gently, "we need to do things that help us remember who we are, not who people expect us to be." Those words stayed with her all night. The next morning, she mentioned it to Mark over breakfast. "It's just a weekend art retreat," she said carefully. "I think it might help me feel more balanced." Mark barely looked up from his phone. "If you think it'll help, go ahead." That was it. No curiosity, no warmth, just permission spoken out of habit. So she went. The retreat was held near a quiet lake surrounded by pine trees and open skies. The cabins were simple but cozy. The air smelled of wood and rain. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. People painted, laughed, and shared stories around a fire at night. David was there too, guiding the group through creative exercises. He was never overly familiar, always respectful, but his presence brought her calm. He noticed when she struggled with a sketch, when her hands trembled as she tried to capture emotions she didn't have words for. "You're holding back," he said quietly. One afternoon, as they sat near the water, she looked down. "Maybe I'm afraid of what I'll see if I stop." He smiled kindly. "Sometimes fear shows us what matters most." His words felt like truth, gentle but powerful. That night, as everyone gathered by the fire, Emma felt something shift inside her. Not romance, not desire, but the realization that she had forgotten herself. She had spent years being everything for everyone else, a wife, a mother, a helper, and somewhere in all of that, she had lost her own voice when she returned home. Mark was on the couch watching TV. He looked up briefly. "How was it?" "It was nice," she said. "Peaceful." He nodded, eyes back on the screen. "Glad you had fun." The conversation ended there. Emma went upstairs, unpacked her things, and sat on the edge of the bed. The loneliness felt heavier now, not because she missed David, but because she finally saw how distant her marriage had become. The next day, she tried to talk again. "Mark, can we do something together? Maybe dinner out this weekend?" He didn't look away from his laptop. "I'll check my schedule. This project is killing me." Emma bit her lip. "You always have a project." He sighed. "Emma, please. I'm trying to provide for us. Isn't that enough?" She wanted to say no, that love was more than bills and stability. But she stayed silent as weeks passed. The emotional distance grew unbearable. Emma found herself painting more late at night, early in the morning. Her art became her only outlet. She painted what she couldn't say: loneliness, fading love. It's the ache of waiting to be seen. David occasionally messaged to check in about her work, her progress, not her feelings. Yet every message reminded her of how much she missed being genuinely understood. One evening, he showed one of her new paintings to Mark. "What do you think?" she asked hopefully. He glanced at it for a second. "It's good," he said flatly. "You're really getting into this art thing." Then he went back to his computer. That moment broke something in her. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't realize how much that small acknowledgement could have meant. One afternoon, Claire visited again. "You look exhausted," she said. Emma laughed softly. "Maybe I am." Claire looked at her with concern. "Emma, are you happy?" The question hung in the air. Happiness felt like a distant word, something that belonged to another lifetime. "I don't know," she whispered. "I think I've forgotten what that feels like." Claire reached for her hand. "Don't let yourself fade. You deserve to feel alive." That night, those words echoed in her mind. She sat in her studio, staring at her unfinished painting, the two hands almost touching. Tears welled up as she realized how perfectly it symbolized her life. She and Mark were still reaching for each other, but the space between them had grown too wide. A few days later, Mark came home earlier than usual. "We should talk," he said, surprising her. Her heart raced. "About what?" He looked tired, his eyes heavy with something she couldn't read. "I know I've been distant. I just don't know how to fix it anymore." Emma froze. She had waited years to hear those words, but now they felt too late. "Do you even want to fix it?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Of course I do. But I don't know where to start." Tears filled her eyes. "Maybe we start by being honest. With ourselves." They sat there in silence, two people who once shared everything, struggling to find words that could bridge a chasm built over years of silence. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the lights flicker outside. She didn't know what the future held, whether she could rebuild her marriage or if it was already too late. But she knew one thing for sure: pretending wasn't enough anymore. As she turned off the light, a quiet determination grew in her heart. She didn't need someone to save her, she needed to save herself. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the beginning of everything she had been searching for. The morning after their talk, Emma woke to a strange quietness in the house. The kind that felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something. Mark had already left for work, his side of the bed cold, untouched. She sat there for a long time, staring at the window where soft light spilled across the floor. For the first time, she realized that her heart wasn't just tired, it was empty. An emptiness, she thought, could be louder than anger. Over the next few days, she tried to act normal. She cooked, cleaned, painted, and smiled when she had to. But inside, she was unraveling. Every routine felt meaningless. Every silence between her and Mark felt wider. Even when they sat together at dinner, they spoke in short, polite sentences, like strangers being careful not to offend each other. Then one evening, David messaged her. "I'm hosting a small exhibit next week. Some of your work deserves to be seen." Her first instinct was to refuse. She didn't feel ready. But something in her whispered, "Go." Maybe it wasn't about the art. Maybe it was about finding a piece of herself again. So she agreed. The night of the exhibition, the gallery was softly lit, filled with quiet conversations and the smell of fresh paint. Emma wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but it made her feel alive again. Her paintings hung neatly on the wall, including her favorite, the two hands almost touching. David found her standing before it. "You finally finished it," he said, smiling. She nodded. "Yes, it's about connection and distance, about how close we can be even when we're far apart." He looked at her, understanding more than her words. "You've changed, Emma. There's strength in your eyes now." Its compliment felt kind, not romantic, and that made it even more powerful. For once, someone saw her not as a wife or mother, but as a person who had rebuilt herself. They talked for a while about art, healing, and learning to let go of pain. When the evening ended, David thanked her. "You reminded me that beauty can come even from heartbreak," he said. Emma smiled. "You reminded me that I still have something to give." When she left the gallery, she felt lighter than she had in years. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and for a brief moment, she felt free. But freedom has a way of testing people. When Emma returned home, Mark was sitting on the couch, waiting. His face was tense, his eyes tired. "You didn't tell me there was an exhibition," he said quietly. She froze. "I didn't think you'd be interested," he sighed. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You don't think I care anymore?" Emma looked at him, her voice trembling. "Do you?" Mark hesitated. "I used to, I still do. But everything between us feels broken." There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. Emma sat down across from him. "Mark, I've tried for so long to fix this, to reach you. But you're always somewhere else. Your work, your phone, your silence." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You think I don't notice? I know I've failed you. I didn't know how to make it right." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she thought he didn't care. But now, hearing the guilt in his voice, she saw something different. A man who was also lost. That night, they didn't fight. They just talked honestly. For the first time in years, Mark told her how he'd felt pressured to be perfect, to provide everything she needed. "I thought if I worked harder, you'd be happy," he said. Emma shook her head. "I never wanted perfection, Mark. I just wanted you, your time, your voice, your heart." Silence followed. Not an angry one, but the kind that comes when two people finally begin to understand each other before going to bed. Mark said quietly, "I don't want to lose you, Emma, but I don't even know if you still love me." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I don't know either," she whispered, "but I want to find out." The next morning, Emma decided to take a walk by the lake, the same one from the art retreat. The air was cool and the water shimmered in the sunlight. She thought about everything, the years of silence, the brief connection she'd felt with David, and the fragile possibility of rebuilding with Mark. She realized something. It's profound. What she truly missed wasn't romance or excitement, it was being seen. She wanted to be valued, to feel alive, and to be loved with presence, not just duty. For the first time, she didn't feel angry at Mark. She felt compassion for both of them. They had simply drifted, each trying to survive in their own way. That evening, she came home with a quiet resolve. Mark was at the table, sorting through work papers. She sat across from him. "I've been thinking," she began. "Maybe we both forgot what love looks like. Maybe it's not the same as before, but it doesn't have to be over." He looked up slowly. "You think we can fix this?" She smiled sadly. "I think we can try. Not because we owe each other, but because we once made a promise to care, and I still believe in that." Mark stared at her, his eyes softening. "I want to try too. I don't want to live like strangers anymore." For the first time in years, they reached for each other's hands, hesitant at first, but real. The same gesture she had painted on canvas now played out before her eyes. This time not as art, but as life. The days that followed were not easy. Healing rarely is. They went to counseling, took long walks, and relearned how to talk without hurting. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried. But slowly, something began to grow again. Not the old love, but a new kind, gentler and wiser. Emma stopped visiting the art center for a while. Not out of avoidance, but to focus on her home. She still painted, though, late at night when the world was quiet. Her art became lighter, filled with color and hope. David visited one afternoon to drop off some of her artwork from the exhibit. He smiled when he saw her. "You look different," he said. "I feel different," she replied. "I'm finally choosing peace over pain." He nodded, understanding. "You found what you were looking for." She looked toward the living room where Mark was fixing a shelf. Maybe I did, she said softly. Months passed, and their home began to feel warm again. There were still moments of frustration, but also laughter that echoed through the rooms like it used to. Emma started teaching art classes at the community center, helping others find healing through creativity, just as she had. One evening, while cleaning up her brushes, she looked at the old painting, the two hands almost touching. With a small smile, she added a final stroke, connecting them. Mark entered quietly behind her. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's finally finished," she replied. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "So are we." She leaned her head on his chest. "No," she said. "We're just beginning again." Years later, Emma's art would hang in small local galleries, not for fame, but as a reminder of resilience and forgiveness. People would ask her what inspired her most famous piece, the one with the hands, touching beneath a golden light. And she would always smile and say, "It's about learning that love isn't perfect. It's about choosing to stay, even when it's hard. Because sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the cracks we dare to heal." Olivia Parker stood at the edge of the small stone path leading to her landlord's front porch, her heart beating faster than it should have. The cold evening air brushed her cheeks, but the chill wasn't what made her shiver. She had gone over this moment in her head a dozen times, yet she still didn't know what to say once she got there. The envelope in her hand held the rent, but that wasn't why she was here. David Collins, her landlord, lived in the main house at the front of the property. Olivia rented the little cottage behind it, surrounded by trees and quiet space. It had been her escape when life with Mark, her husband, had become too heavy. She had thought distance would help them reconnect. It hadn't. The silence between them only grew louder. And every evening felt colder than the last dot when David opened the door. The light from his hallway spilled onto the porch, warming the space between them. He looked surprised to see her, not shocked, just quietly curious. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, but gentle in his movements, with a calmness that made people feel safe around him. "Olivia," he said, his voice low and steady. "Everything all right?" She hesitated. "Yeah, I just needed to talk." David studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and old books. The warmth made her body relax before her mind could catch up. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been, not just tonight, but for months. David gestured toward the couch. "You want some tea?" She shook her head. "No, thank you." He nodded, sat down across from her, and waited. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence with empty words. That patience. It was something she'd forgotten people were capable of. "I don't know why I came," Olivia started quietly. "I just couldn't stay in that house tonight." David didn't ask questions. He simply leaned back, his eyes soft. She looked around the room, neat, warm, lived in. There were family pictures on the shelves, books stacked neatly beside a record player. The kind of home that felt like someone cared about it. Hers had stopped feeling like that long ago. "My husband," she said after a moment, "we don't talk anymore. We barely even look at each other. It's like living with a stranger." David nodded slowly. "That's hard." "It's more than hard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's like I don't even exist to him anymore. I could disappear and he wouldn't notice." David didn't try to fix her pain. He didn't say the usual things, "It'll get better," or "maybe he's just stressed." He just listened, really listened, and that alone made her feel seen. "Finally," he said softly, "you're not invisible, Olivia. You're just tired of being unseen." Oh. The words hit her like a quiet wave. No one had ever said it like that before. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. She blinked back the sting in her eyes and looked away, embarrassed by the sudden emotion. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," David interrupted gently. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for feeling lonely." His tone was calm, genuine. She couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to her without anger or impatience. For years, she had been walking on eggshells, saying the right things, hiding what hurt, pretending that everything was fine. Sitting there, she felt all of that crumble just a little. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of something else, something real, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "You've always been kind, David," she murmured. "You didn't have to let me rent that cottage when I showed up crying on your doorstep 2 years ago." He smiled faintly. "You needed a place to start over. We all do at some point." She studied him, the calm lines around his eyes, the way he seemed grounded, steady. David wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. He carried peace with him, and it made her realize how chaotic her life had become. "Do you ever feel like you made all the wrong choices?" she asked suddenly. He met her eyes. "I used to. But then I learned that sometimes the wrong choices lead you exactly where you need to be." His words lingered in the air, quiet but heavy with meaning. She felt something stir inside her. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. A connection she hadn't expected, born out of honesty. A clock ticked softly on the wall. She realized she'd been there longer than she intended. "I should go," she said, rising quickly. David stood too. "You can stay a bit longer if you want." She shook her head with a small, polite smile. "Thank you. I just needed this." To talk. He walked her to the door but didn't open it right away. The lamplight behind him softened his face, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You don't have to go through this alone, Olivia." She looked up at him, unsure what to say. For a second, she thought about all the nights she had sat in her cottage, staring at the same four walls, wishing someone would just understand. And here was someone who did without her even asking. "Good night." "David," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. He nodded. Still silent, when she stepped outside, the cold hit her again. Sharper now. The moonlight stretched across the path back to her cottage, and each step felt heavier. She didn't know why her heart was beating so fast. Nothing inappropriate had happened, not even close. But something had shifted quietly between them. Back in her small kitchen, she placed the envelope with the rent money on the counter. She had completely forgotten about it during her visit. The whole evening replayed in her mind, his steady eyes, his calm voice. The way he had listened. She sat at the table and closed her eyes. For months she had felt trapped in silence, unseen in her own marriage. But tonight, for a brief moment, she had felt visible again. It scared her and it comforted her. That night Olivia didn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, the air too still. She kept thinking about his words. "You're just tired of being unseen." He had said it so simply, but it had cut through everything she'd been hiding dot by morning. She promised herself she wouldn't think about it anymore. She would pay the rent, keep her distance, and move on. But deep down she already knew some promises are made just to be broken. Olivia spent the next morning pretending everything was normal. She made coffee, checked her emails, and tried to focus on work. But her thoughts kept circling back to last night, to David's calm voice, his quiet understanding, and the way he had looked at her before she left. She told herself it didn't mean anything. It was just a conversation. People talk. People listen. That's all. But her heart didn't seem to believe it. It beat a little faster every time she remembered his words. By late afternoon, the rain had started. A soft, steady drizzle that blurred the world outside her window. She was standing at the sink washing a cup when she heard a knock at her door. She froze. For a second, she thought it might be Mark. Maybe he had finally come to check on her. But no, Mark never showed up without calling first. When she opened the door, David was standing there holding a small umbrella and a paper bag. His coat was damp from the rain. "Hey," he said simply. "I was heading into town earlier and thought I'd bring you some soup. You mentioned last night you hadn't eaten much lately." Olivia blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, you didn't have to do that." "I know," he said with a small smile. "But I wanted to." She hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in before you get soaked." He walked in, shaking off his umbrella, setting the paper bag on the counter. The smell of homemade soup filled the air. It wasn't fancy chicken and vegetables, but somehow it felt like the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. They sat at the small table in her kitchen. The rain tapped gently against the windows. "You didn't have to go through the trouble," she said again, still feeling nervous. "It wasn't trouble," he replied. You looked like you could use a break from everything. She looked down at her bowl, stirring the soup slowly. It's been a rough few months, she admitted. Mark and I, we barely talk anymore. It's like we live in two different worlds. David nodded. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She gave a sad smile. You sound like someone who's been there. He exhaled softly, leaning back. I was married once, a long time ago. Olivia looked up. You never mentioned that. It didn't last, he said simply. We were young, impatient, always expecting perfection from each other. When it didn't come, we blamed instead of understanding. His honesty made her heart ache a little. She saw something in his eyes, not sadness, but wisdom born from loss. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. He thought for a moment. No, regret changes nothing. I just learned what I didn't. No, back then, that love needs peace more than passion. His words stayed with her. Peace. That was exactly what she'd been missing. They talked for over an hour about small things at first, then deeper ones. About books, about travel, about the feeling of getting older and realizing how much time people waste pretending to be happy. Olivia felt herself relax in a way she hadn't in years. There was no judgment, no pressure, just ease. Every word between them felt natural. Like they had known each other far longer than they actually had. When the rain finally slowed, David stood up. I should let you rest. She smiled faintly. Thank you. For the soup and for listening. He nodded, picking up his umbrella. Any time. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Olivia? Yeah. If you ever feel like talking again, or not talking, just being around someone, you know where to find me. Her heart gave a small twist. I do. After he left, Olivia stood in the doorway, watching the rain-soaked path between their houses. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Something inside her was changing, quietly and undeniably. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She thought about his calmness, his steady voice, his kindness. It wasn't attraction, not in a reckless way. It was something gentler, the comfort of being seen, of being cared for without expectation. Still, she felt guilty. Mark was still her husband, even if their marriage felt like an empty shell. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. She and David were just friends. But deep down, she knew that what she felt when she saw him wasn't something she could easily explain. The next few days passed in quiet confusion. Mark called her once, a brief, distant conversation about bills and schedules. He didn't ask how she was, didn't even mention visiting. She hung up feeling emptier than before. One evening, she decided to go for a walk. The air was cool, the sunset soft and golden. Without realizing it, her steps took her toward David's house. She hesitated at the gate. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe he was busy. She turned to leave, but then the door opened. And there he was, holding a mug of coffee, smiling when he saw her. Hey, he said. I was just thinking about checking in on you. She laughed lightly. Guess I saved you the trouble. Come on, he said, motioning her in. You look like you could use something warm. Inside, his living room glowed with the soft light of a lamp. A record played quietly, old jazz, smooth and mellow. It felt peaceful, and for a moment, Olivia wished she could freeze the evening right there. They talked again, this time about music, memories, and all the small things that make people human. He told her about how he fixed up the house himself after the divorce. How he learned to enjoy solitude instead of fearing it. Olivia listened, admiring his calm strength. You make it sound easy, she said. It wasn't, he replied. But pain teaches you patience. Their eyes met. The silence that followed was soft but full, like something unspoken had passed between them. After a moment, she stood. I should go. It's getting late. Okay. He walked her to the door. The porch light cast a warm glow, and the night air smelled like rain. Thank you again, she said quietly, for everything. He nodded. You don't have to thank me, Olivia. Just take care of yourself. Shay smiled. A real one this time, gentle and grateful. "Good night, David." "Good night," he said softly, as she walked back to her cottage. She realized something had changed, not just between them, but within her. She felt alive again in a way she hadn't in years. Not because of romance, not because of desire, but because someone had finally reminded her what kindness felt like. That night, she sat by her window, watching the stars. She thought about the life she had built with Mark, the silence, the distance, the weight of unspoken things. She knew she couldn't go on pretending forever. David wasn't the reason her marriage was broken. But somehow, meeting him had made her see how broken it really was. She didn't know what the future would bring. It's only that she couldn't keep living halfway between love and loneliness. When she finally went to bed, she made herself a quiet promise. Soon, she would find the courage to choose herself again. But she had no idea that the very next day, everything would change because Mark was coming back to town. And this time, he was bringing questions she wasn't ready to answer. The next morning, Olivia woke early. The air was cool, sunlight breaking softly through the curtains. She tried to shake off the restless dreams that had followed her all night. Flashes of David's calm face, a Mark's distant voice, and the hollow sound of her own heart asking questions she didn't want to answer. By noon, her phone buzzed. It was Mark. The message was short. "I'll be home tonight. We need to talk." Her stomach tightened. "We need to talk." Those 4 words could mean anything, but in a marriage like theirs, they rarely meant something good. She looked around the small cottage, noticing things she had ignored for months. The stack of unopened letters, the cold plates in the sink, the flowers David had left on her porch last week, now slightly wilted. Her life felt like a snapshot of quiet confusion. By evening, she heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Mark's car when he walked in, Olivia almost didn't recognize him. He looked tired, his suit wrinkled, his expression unreadable. He greeted her with a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey," he replied, dropping his bag on the chair. "You look different." "Different? How?" "I don't know," he said. "Just different." They stood in silence for a moment before he sighed. "I know I've been away too much. The projects, the deadlines, it's been a mess." "I understand," she said, though she didn't fully mean it. He nodded, then looked at her more closely. "You've been okay, though. The landlord hasn't been bothering you?" Her heart jumped, though she kept her voice steady. "No, David's been great. Very kind, actually." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Kind?" "Yes. He helped fix a few things around the cottage. Just being neighborly." Mark said, walking toward the window. "You've been spending time with him, then?" There it was, not exactly jealousy, but suspicion wrapped in casual tone. "Just as friends," Olivia said carefully. "Easy to talk to." Mark's expression tightened. "I see." The tension filled the room like heavy smoke. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia wanted to tell him everything. Not that she had done anything wrong, but that his absence had left her feeling invisible. But the words stuck in her throat. Finally, he said, "I'll be here for a few days. Maybe we can figure things out." She nodded, though her heart wasn't sure what "figure things out" meant anymore. That night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. He had fallen asleep quickly, like always. The sound of his steady breathing filled the quiet. Once upon a time, that sound had comforted her. Now, it just reminded her how far apart they'd grown. The next day, Mark spent most of his time on calls. Olivia tried to distract herself by gardening. But every time she looked across the yard toward David's house, her heart tightened. That evening, as the sky turned pink, she saw David outside, fixing a fence. Their eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod, polite, distant. He was keeping his promise to stay respectful, but his eyes said he understood more than words ever could. She wanted to go over to talk, to explain. But she couldn't, not with Mark around. Later that night, after dinner, Mark sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. "You know," he said casually, "David seems to take a lot of interest in you. Olivia set down her cup. He's just been kind. Kind, Mark repeated. That's what people call it these days. She looked at him sharply. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged. Nothing. I just find it strange that my wife talks more about our landlord than about me. Her voice trembled, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe because he listens. The silence that followed was sharp and cutting. Mark looked at her, surprised, maybe even hurt. But Olivia didn't take it back. She stood and walked outside before the argument could grow. The air was cool and still. She walked down the path without really deciding where she was going until she found herself standing in front of David's porch. He looked up from his chair when he saw her. Olivia, sorry, she said softly. I shouldn't be here. Then why are you? She hesitated. It's because I needed to be somewhere that doesn't feel heavy. He stood, concern in his eyes. Did something happen? She shook her head. No, it's just, Mark and I are trying, but it feels like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. David didn't interrupt. He just listened, his gaze steady and kind. I don't even know what I'm doing, she continued, her voice breaking. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I can't keep living like I don't exist. David took a slow breath. You're not wrong for wanting to feel alive again, but don't confuse kindness with escape. His words sank deep. I'm not, she said. He interrupted softly. Olivia, listen. Whatever happens between you and Mark, make sure it's about truth, not loneliness. She nodded slowly. I think I've already made up my mind. I just need to find the courage to say it. They stood there in silence for a long time, the night breeze brushing against them. It wasn't romantic, not in the usual sense. It was raw and human to people standing in the truth of what they felt, but choosing to do the right thing. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled gently. You don't need to thank me. Just promise me something. Don't lose yourself trying to fix something that broke you. Her eyes welled with tears. I promise. The next morning, Olivia sat across from Mark at breakfast. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting the table in gold. Mark, she began, her voice calm but steady. We need to talk. He set down his cup, looking wary. About what? About us, she said. About how we've been living like strangers. He leaned back, sighing. I know I haven't been around much, but it's not just that, she interrupted gently. It's everything. The distance, the silence, the pretending. We both know this isn't working. Mark looked down, his hands tightening around the cup. So, what are you saying? I think we need time apart. Real time to figure out who we are again. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with something between sadness and relief. I didn't mean for it to end this way, he said quietly. Neither did I, she replied, but maybe it's not an ending. Maybe it's the start of something honest. That afternoon, Mark packed a small bag and left for a hotel downtown. They agreed to talk again in a few weeks, but deep down, Olivia knew the chapter was closing. As evening fell, she stepped outside and looked toward David's house. The porch light was on. She didn't go over. Not tonight. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, not because of David, but because she had finally chosen herself. Days passed quietly. She focused on her work, her garden, her thoughts. Sometimes she saw David across the yard and they'd exchange a wave. There was understanding between them. Respect, not regret. One weekend evening, he stopped by to return a book she had lent him. They stood at the door, both smiling. You look lighter, he said kindly. I feel lighter, she replied. I'm glad, he said. You deserve that. They talked for a few minutes, simple things, easy laughter. Then, as he turned to leave, Olivia said, David. He turned back. Thank you for being there when I needed a reminder that life isn't over yet. He smiled, warm, steady, sincere. That's what neighbors are for. As he walked away, Olivia closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. She knew this was the right path. Not about escape or temptation, but healing. Outside, the night was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a new day was waiting. And for the first time in years, Olivia felt ready to meet it, free, honest, and alive again.